In the late 1920s, Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Its rich black soil fed millions. Independent farmers shaped the land, the culture, and the economy. So how did this fertile region become the center of one of the deadliest famines in history? Joseph Stalin's government moved to end private land ownership and force farmers into state-run collectives. Many Ukrainian peasants resisted. They were branded kulaks, enemies of the state, and targeted for punishment. Then came the turning point. In 1932, Moscow imposed grain quotas so high they were impossible to meet. When villages failed, teams of activists arrived. They seized not only crops, but every scrap of food inside homes. Livestock, seed grain, even family supplies were taken. Borders were sealed so no one could escape. Starvation became policy. The countryside grew silent as entire communities weakened and died. At the same time, the Soviet state denied any famine existed and continued exporting grain abroad. By the spring of 1933, deaths reached an estimated 25,000 people per day. In total, historians believe between 3.5 and 7 million Ukrainians perished. This catastrophe became known as the Holodomor, to kill by starvation. It broke rural resistance and scarred Ukraine for generations. Today, many countries recognize the famine as a genocide against the Ukrainian people, a grim reminder of how political power can turn food into a weapon. In the early 2000s, the United States was the world's leading economic and military power. Daily life felt stable for many Americans. Major cities were busy. Airports were crowded. Few imagined that a single morning could change the nation forever. So how did September 11, 2001 become one of the darkest days in modern history? 19 men linked to the extremist group Al-Qaeda boarded 4 passenger planes. Their goal was to strike symbolic targets and spread fear across the country. Then came the turning point. At 8:46 a.m., the first plane crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Minutes later, a second jet hit the South Tower. Smoke filled the sky. Millions watched live on television as the towers burned. A third plane slammed into the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. The fourth aircraft, United Flight 93, never reached its target. Passengers fought back. The plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Less than 2 hours after the first impact, both towers collapsed. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. Firefighters, police officers, office workers, and travelers lost their lives. The nation stood still. Streets fell quiet. Flags were lowered. Families waited for news that never came. The U.S. government quickly blamed Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden. New security laws were passed. Airport screening changed forever. The attacks also led to wars in Afghanistan and later Iraq. September 11th reshaped how Americans saw safety, travel, and global threats. Today, memorials stand where the towers once rose. Each year, names are read aloud in remembrance. The attacks remain a painful reminder of loss and of how one morning altered the course of history. In the final months of World War II, Japan and the United States were locked in a brutal conflict. Air raids had already destroyed many Japanese cities. Fighting in the Pacific had cost millions of lives. Leaders on both sides believed the war had to end soon, but how? So why did one single bomb change history forever? The United States had secretly developed a new weapon called the atomic bomb. It released energy from inside atoms, creating an explosion far stronger than any used before. American leaders hoped the weapon would force Japan to surrender and avoid a long invasion. Then came the turning point. On August 6, 1945, a US B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., it dropped a bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Seconds later, a blinding flash lit the sky. The blast flattened buildings across the city. Fire spread in every direction. People near the center were killed instantly. Others were burned or injured by flying debris. A towering cloud of smoke and dust rose into the air. Tens of thousands died that day. Hospitals collapsed. Doctors were overwhelmed. Survivors wandered through ruins, calling for family members. Many had strange burns. Others grew sick in the days that followed, not knowing they had been exposed to radiation. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb struck Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan announced it would surrender. World War II soon came to an end. But Hiroshima did not simply fade into history. In the years after the bombing, many survivors suffered long-term health problems, including cancer. Children were born with serious illnesses. The city rebuilt, yet the memory remained deep. Today, Hiroshima is home to peace parks and memorials. Each year, people gather to remember the victims and warn future generations. The bombing of Hiroshima became a symbol of the power and danger of nuclear weapons. It raises a lasting question. How should humanity use technology capable of destroying entire cities? In the 1980s, nuclear power was seen as the future. It promised cheap electricity and modern progress. The Soviet Union built massive reactors across its territory. One of the newest was the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, near the town of Pripyat in Ukraine. So how did this symbol of progress become a global disaster? The trouble started during a safety test on the night of April 25, 1986. Operators planned to test how the reactor would respond to a power outage. To perform the test, they removed most of the control rod's key devices that regulate the nuclear reaction. At the same time, the cooling system failed. Pressure inside the reactor rose dangerously. Then came the turning point. At 1:00 a.m. on April 26, the reactor exploded. The blast tore the roof off the building and sent radioactive smoke and debris high into the sky. The amount of radiation released was staggering, roughly 400 times that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. First responders rushed in to fight the fire. Most wore no protective gear, unaware of the radiation. Within days, 28 firefighters and plant workers died from acute radiation sickness. Hundreds more suffered long-term health problems. Soviet authorities initially tried to hide the disaster. Nearby towns were not warned. Evacuations began only after radiation spread far and wide. Over 600,000 people, firefighters, soldiers, plant workers, and volunteers were involved in cleaning up the site. The most dangerous phase lasted 10 straight days. Today, Chernobyl remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth. The town of Pripyat is abandoned, frozen in time. Wildlife has returned, but radiation is still present. The disaster exposed the dangers of nuclear power and the cost of secrecy. It changed safety standards worldwide. It also left a lasting reminder: even the most advanced technology can become deadly if mismanaged. Chernobyl is now a symbol of both human error and courage. The people who risked their lives to contain the disaster are remembered as heroes, and the lessons from that night continue to warn the world. In the early 2000s, the Indian Ocean region was home to millions of people living along the coast. Fishing villages, tourist resorts, and bustling cities thrived on the sea. Life depended on the ocean for food, trade, and income. But nature had a deadly plan. On December 26, 2004, at 7:58 a.m. local time, a massive earthquake struck off the west coast of northern Sumatra, Indonesia. The earthquake measured 9.1 minus 9.3 on the Richter scale. It was one of the strongest ever recorded. The quake happened beneath the ocean floor, displacing enormous amounts of water. This triggered a series of massive waves, a tsunami racing across the Indian Ocean. The first wave hit the coast of Aceh, Indonesia, just 15 minutes after the quake. The water surged with incredible speed, reaching as high as 30 feet in some places. The destruction was immediate. Homes, schools, and entire villages were swept away. People had almost no time to react. Fishermen out at sea were thrown onto land, and coastal residents were carried for inland by the waves. Within hours, the tsunami spread to neighboring countries. Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and even the Maldives were hit. Coastal towns were flattened. Roads, bridges, and communication lines were destroyed, leaving many isolated and helpless. The death toll was staggering. Over 230,000 people lost their lives across 14 countries. Millions more were injured or left homeless. Entire communities were wiped out. Families disappeared, and survivors were left in shock. The world watched in horror. Relief agencies scrambled to help, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Food, water, and medical supplies were scarce. Emergency workers faced disease, damaged infrastructure, and the trauma of seeing so much death. In the months that followed, aid poured in from around the globe. Temporary shelters were built, and efforts to restore water and food continued for years. Scientists studied the event to improve tsunami warning systems. Countries in the Indian Ocean region worked together to create early warning networks to prevent future disasters. The 2004 tsunami remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. It changed entire regions forever. It reminded the world how powerful the ocean can be and how vulnerable humans are. It also showed the importance of preparation, early warning, and international cooperation. For survivors, the memories remain vivid. For the world, it became a lesson in resilience and the urgent need to respect the forces of nature. In early 2011, Japan was a modern, industrial nation, known for technology and coastal cities. Millions of people lived along the eastern coast, working in towns, fishing villages, and large cities. Life depended on electricity, trade, and access to the sea. But nature had a deadly plan. On March 11, 2011, at 2:46 p.m. local time, a massive 9.0 earthquake struck off the northeast coast of Japan. The quake was one of the strongest ever recorded. Buildings shook violently, and millions were thrown into chaos. About 30 minutes later, a giant tsunami slammed into the coast. Waves as high as 40 feet destroyed homes, schools, and ports. Cars and boats were carried inland. Entire towns vanished. The power supply was wiped out in many regions. Among the hardest hit was the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, with electricity gone. The cooling systems of 3 reactors failed. Without cooling, the reactors overheated. Pressure built up inside. On March 12, the first reactor exploded, sending radioactive material into the air. The second reactor followed on March 14, and the third on March 15. The disaster was classified as Level 7 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the highest possible rating. Radioactive material spread across the surrounding area, contaminating air, soil, and water. Surprisingly, only one death was directly linked to radiation, but the indirect consequences were huge. About 165,000 people were forced to evacuate their homes. Many could never return. Communities, schools, and businesses were destroyed. The Japanese government and international organizations rushed to respond. Evacuation zones were set up. Food, water, and medical aid were distributed. Long-term cleanup and decontamination took years. The Fukushima disaster changed nuclear energy worldwide. Countries reviewed safety rules. Emergency systems were improved. Early warning, backup power, and evacuation plans became priorities. Today, Fukushima remains a warning of how quickly a natural disaster can trigger a nuclear crisis. It showed the world the dangers of combining natural forces with human technology, and it reminded people that preparation, safety, and caution are always vital. In 1912, the RMS Titanic was the largest and most advanced passenger ship ever built. People called it unsinkable. It carried wealthy travelers, families moving to new lives, and workers searching for opportunity. For many, the voyage across the Atlantic felt safe and full of hope. But danger was already waiting in the cold, dark water. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic was sailing through the North Atlantic. The sea was calm, and the sky was clear. Lookout spotted an iceberg too late. The ship tried to turn, but it was moving too fast. The iceberg scraped along the side, tearing open several compartments below the waterline. At first, many passengers did not panic. The damage did not seem serious. Crew members inspected the ship and soon realized the truth. Water was flooding in, and the Titanic could not stay afloat. Then everything changed. Lifeboats were ordered to be lowered, but there were not enough for everyone on board. Confusion spread through the decks. Some people refused to leave the warm ship. Others rushed forward in fear. Women and children were told to go first, while musicians played to keep people calm. The ship slowly tilted forward as freezing seawater poured inside. Rockets and distress signals lit up the sky, but help was far away. After more than 2 hours of struggle, the Titanic broke apart and sank beneath the waves in the early hours of April 15th. More than 1,500 people lost their lives, mostly from the icy water. Only about 700 survived, many rescued by the nearby ship Carpathia. The tragedy shocked the world and filled newspapers across every continent. Investigations followed soon after. They revealed serious problems: too few lifeboats, poor communication, and ignored iceberg warnings. Public anger was strong. The disaster led to major changes in sea travel. New safety laws required enough lifeboats for all passengers. Ships had to run radio systems day and night. Ice patrols were created to watch dangerous waters. Today, the Titanic remains one of the most famous shipwrecks in history. It stands as a warning about pride, risk, and human error, and it reminds the world that even the greatest machines can fail. In the early 1980s, the city of Bhopal in central India was growing fast. A large chemical factory sat near crowded neighborhoods. It was owned by Union Carbide and made pesticides for farming. Many people lived close to the plant and trusted it to be safe, but serious risks were already building inside. Late at night on December 2, 1984, water entered a storage tank that held a toxic chemical called methyl isocyanate, or MIC. The tank overheated. Pressure rose quickly. Safety systems failed or were turned off. Workers struggled to stop what was happening. Then everything changed. Just after midnight, a cloud of deadly gas burst from the plant and drifted over the sleeping city. People woke up coughing and choking. Their eyes burned. They ran into the streets in panic, not knowing what was happening. Hospitals filled within minutes. Doctors had no warning and little information about the gas. Thousands died in the first hours. Animals collapsed in the rows. Families were torn apart in the chaos. Many survivors were left with lasting lung damage, eye problems, and other serious health issues. The disaster shocked the world. Officials ordered evacuations and tried to seal the leak. The factory was shut down soon after. Investigations pointed to poor maintenance, weak safety rules, and cost-cutting measures. In the years that followed, long legal battles began. Union Carbide paid a settlement to the Indian government. Victims said it was far from enough. Contaminated soil and water remained near the site for decades. Today, the Bhopal gas leak is remembered as the worst industrial disaster in history. It changed how many countries regulate chemical plants. It also became a warning about placing dangerous factories near homes. Most of all, it stands as a lesson about what can happen when safety is ignored. In the late 2000s, deep-sea oil drilling was expanding fast in the Gulf of Mexico. One of the largest projects belonged to BP and used a drilling rig called Deepwater Horizon. The rig floated far offshore and drilled miles below the ocean floor. It was meant to be protected by layers of safety systems, but serious problems were already building beneath the surface. On April 20, 2010, workers were finishing a deep well and preparing to seal it. Tests showed strange pressure readings, but the warnings were missed or ignored. A key safety device called a blowout preventer was supposed to stop any surge of oil or gas. It failed. Then everything changed. High-pressure gas shot up the drill pipe and exploded on the rig. Fire spread fast. Workers ran for their lives as flames rose into the night sky. Two huge blasts rocked the platform. 11 crew members were killed, and many others were injured. After burning for 2 days, the rig sank into the sea. Oil began pouring from the broken well far below the surface. Day after day, thick black crude spread across the Gulf. Beaches were coated. Birds, turtles, and fish were covered in oil. Fishing and tourism came to a halt in many coastal towns. The spill lasted for nearly 3 months before engineers finally sealed the well. By then, millions of barrels of oil had escaped into the ocean. It became the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history. Investigations later pointed to rushed decisions, poor communication, and failed safety systems. BP and its partners faced huge fines and legal settlements. Cleanup crews worked for years to remove oil from water and shorelines. Today, the Deepwater Horizon disaster is remembered as a turning point. It changed rules for offshore drilling and emergency response. It also stands as a warning about the risks of drilling in extreme conditions. When safety systems fail, the damage can spread far beyond the rig itself. In the mid-1980s, NASA's Space Shuttle program stood as a symbol of American pride and progress. The shuttles were designed to launch satellites, run science experiments, and show that space travel could become routine. One mission in particular drew huge public attention. It carried Krista McAuliffe, a schoolteacher chosen to inspire students across the nation. But behind the excitement, serious risks had been growing. Engineers had long worried about rubber seals called O-rings inside the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. These rings were meant to keep hot gases from escaping during launch. Cold weather made them stiff and less able to seal properly. On the night before liftoff, temperatures dropped far below normal at Cape Canaveral. Some engineers warned that the launch should be delayed. Then everything changed. On the morning of January 28, 1986, Challenger lifted off into a clear winter sky. For just over a minute, the flight seemed normal. Then a bright flash appeared near one booster. Hot gas burst out, cutting into the external fuel tank. 73 seconds after launch, the shuttle broke apart in a massive fireball. Millions watching live on television froze in shock. All 7 crew members were killed. The nation mourned together, stunned by the sudden loss. Flights were grounded as investigations began. A presidential commission studied the disaster and found that the O-rings had failed in the cold. It also pointed to poor communication and pressure to stay on schedule. NASA redesigned the boosters and changed safety rules before flying again. Years later, today, the Challenger disaster is remembered as a painful lesson. It showed that even advanced technology depends on careful choices. Warnings must be taken seriously, no matter the deadline. The loss of the crew reshaped NASA and reminded the world that space exploration always carries risk. In the early 2000s, China's Sichuan province was home to millions of people living in cities. towns, and mountain villages. The region sat along major fault lines where Earth's crust slowly pushed and strained. Scientists knew large earthquakes were possible, but no one knew exactly when one would strike. On May 12, 2008, an ordinary school day and work afternoon suddenly turned into disaster. At 2:28 p.m., the ground began to shake with violent force. Buildings swayed, roads cracked open, hillsides collapsed in massive landslides. The shaking lasted only minutes, but the damage was overwhelming. Then everything changed. Entire neighborhoods fell into piles of rubble. Thousands of schools, homes, and offices collapsed. In some towns, classrooms were crushed while lessons were still in progress. Power lines snapped, phone towers went silent, highways split apart, cutting off rescue teams. More than 69,000 people were killed, and tens of thousands were injured. Millions lost their homes. Cold nights followed, with families sleeping in tents and open fields. Rescue crews rushed in from across China. Soldiers, doctors, and volunteers climbed through broken concrete and twisted steel. Helicopters dropped supplies to mountain villages cut off by landslides. Survivors were pulled from debris days after the quake, giving moments of hope amid grief. As emergency work continued, questions soon followed. Some buildings, especially schools, had collapsed far more easily than others. Families demanded answers about construction standards and safety rules. Officials promised reviews and rebuilding programs. In the years that followed, entire towns were rebuilt. Stricter building codes were introduced to make structures safer during future quakes. Memorials were created to honor those who died. Today, the Sichuan earthquake stands as one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern Chinese history. It reminds the world how fast life can change and how vital strong construction and disaster planning truly are. In the years before 2020, Beirut was a busy coastal city and the heart of Lebanon's trade. Its port handled food, fuel, and goods for much of the country. Few residents knew that inside one of the warehouses sat a massive stockpile of ammonium nitrate, a chemical used in fertilizers and explosives. It had been stored there for years after being seized from a ship, with little public attention or clear safety planning. On August 4, 2020, an ordinary summer afternoon suddenly turned into a nightmare. A fire broke out inside the port area. Smoke rose into the sky as people nearby filmed with their phones. Then everything changed. A blinding flash lit up the city. A huge blast followed, louder than thunder. The shockwave tore through streets and buildings miles away. Windows shattered across entire neighborhoods. Cars were flipped. Balconies collapsed. The explosion carved a massive crater at the docks and sent a towering cloud shaped like a mushroom over Beirut. More than 200 people were killed. Thousands were injured. Around 300,000 residents lost their homes in seconds. Hospitals filled beyond capacity, many already strained by economic troubles and the pandemic. Rescue workers, firefighters, and volunteers rushed into the wreckage. They searched for survivors under broken concrete and twisted metal. Blood donation lines stretched through the night. Countries around the world sent aid and emergency teams. As the smoke cleared, anger and grief spread across the nation. Citizens demanded to know why such dangerous material had been left in the port for so long. Officials launched investigations into responsibility and safety failures. In the months and years that followed, Beirut struggled to recover. Many families rebuilt homes and businesses piece by piece. The blast became a symbol of deeper problems, including poor oversight and political gridlock. Today, the Beirut port explosion stands as one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in modern history. It serves as a painful reminder of how neglect and unsafe storage can turn routine places into scenes of sudden catastrophe. In the late 1990s, Columbine High School sat in a quiet suburb of Littleton, Colorado. It looked like many American schools. Students went to class, joined sports teams, and planned for college. Few imagined that the campus would soon become known around the world for tragedy. Behind the scenes, two students were struggling with anger, isolation, and violent ideas. They planned in secret for months. Warning signs existed, but they were not fully understood at the time. On April 20, 1999, an ordinary school day suddenly turned into horror. The two students arrived on campus carrying weapons and homemade explosives. They began shooting inside and outside the school. Fire alarms sounded. Students ran for cover. Teachers locked doors and tried to protect their classes. Police rushed to the scene as chaos spread. The attack lasted less than an hour, but the damage was devastating. 12 students and 1 teacher were killed. More than 20 others were injured. The attackers later died by suicide. Ambulances lined the streets. Parents waited in fear for news of their children. Hospitals treated the wounded through the afternoon. The nation watched live updates on television as details slowly emerged. In the days that followed, the community mourned together. Vigils filled parks and churches. Questions rose about school safety, bullying, gun access, and mental health. Investigators worked to understand how the attack had been planned and what signs had been missed. Over time, Columbine reshaped how the United States talks about school violence. Police tactics changed. Schools added security systems and emergency drills. Threat reporting programs grew more common. Today, Columbine remains a symbol of a painful turning point. It reminds the public of the need to spot warning signs early, protect students, and take violent threats seriously before lives are lost. In the late 1970s, nuclear power was seen as a symbol of modern energy in the United States. Plants across the country promised clean electricity and strong growth. One of them stood near the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. It was called 3 Mile Island. The site supplied power to millions of homes and was considered safe by most people. But inside the plant, complex machines worked every second to keep the reactor cool. Valves, pumps, and alarms had to work perfectly. Even small failures could cause serious trouble if workers did not understand what was happening. Then came the turning point. Early in the morning of March 28, 1979, a problem began in one reactor unit. A valve stuck open and let cooling water escape, but control room lights suggested it had closed. Operators believed the system was fine. They slowed the flow of water, not knowing the reactor was overheating. As temperatures rose, fuel inside the core started to melt. Radiation levels increased inside the plant. Confusing alarms sounded across the control room. For hours, workers struggled to figure out the real cause of the problem. News soon reached the public. Local officials worried about safety. Some residents left the area, especially families with young children and pregnant women. Helicopters measured radiation in the air. The governor urged calm while experts rushed to study the damage. After several tense days, engineers brought the reactor under control. Most of the fuel damage stayed inside the containment building. Only small amounts of radiation escaped into the environment. No immediate deaths or injuries were linked directly to the accident. Still, fear had spread far beyond Pennsylvania. Television coverage ran non-stop. People questioned whether nuclear power was truly safe. Public trust dropped sharply. In the years that followed, safety rules became much stricter. Training programs improved. Control rooms were redesigned to be clearer. Emergency plans were updated nationwide. Today, 3 Mile Island is remembered as the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history. It did not cause mass casualties, but it changed how Americans think about nuclear energy. The event stands as a warning that even advanced systems can fail, and that clear information and quick decisions matter when lives may be at risk. In the early 1900s, Halifax, Canada, was a busy harbor city. Its port handled ships from around the world. During World War I, traffic increased as vessels carried troops, fuel, and supplies. The harbor became crowded and tense, with safety rules often stretched thin. One winter morning in December 1917, 2 ships entered the narrow harbor passage. One was the Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship loaded with explosives meant for the war effort. The other was the Imo, a Norwegian relief ship leaving port. Both vessels tried to pass through the channel, but confusion over right of way caused trouble. Then came the turning point. The ships collided at low speed, but sparks flew from scraping metal. Barrels of fuel on Mont Blanc caught fire. Thick smoke rose into the sky and drifted toward the shore. Many people stopped to watch, unaware of the danger floating in the water. For about 20 minutes, the burning ship drifted closer to the city. Fire crews rushed in small boats, not knowing what was inside the hold. Residents gathered at windows. Children ran through the streets pointing at the flames. At 9:04 a.m., the Mont Blanc exploded. The blast was one of the largest man-made explosions ever recorded at that time. A shockwave flattened buildings, shattered glass miles away, and sent debris flying through the air. A massive wall of water surged onto the shore, crushing docks and homes near the harbor. Nearly 2,000 people were killed, and thousands more were injured. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors worked non-stop. Volunteers rushed in from nearby towns, and trains brought aid through snowstorms. In the years that followed, Halifax rebuilt. New safety rules were created for shipping dangerous cargo. The city redesigned damaged neighborhoods and strengthened emergency systems. Today, the Halifax explosion is remembered as a tragic lesson in risk and human error. It shows how a single accident can change a city in seconds, and why strict safety rules matter. When powerful materials are involved,